But we are starting in mainland Europe, which is now the continent hardest hit by coronavirus. New figures released today show that COVID-19 has now killed more than 30,000 people, with three-quarters of those deaths occurring in either Spain or Italy. Well, across Europe, almost 460,000 people have been infected with this virus. And just have a look at the images from Madrid today. The streets continue to be virtually empty as the impact of the Spanish government's even more stringent lockdown have come into effect. From Monday, all non-essential work was halted, the nation coming to a virtual standstill, and with sadly good reason. The death toll there continues to slow in the nation, but that much-needed drop in the curve is yet to come. And you can see today's figures show the country lost 864 lives to the virus on just one day, just on Tuesday. This is the fifth day in a row that Spain has seen a death toll higher than 800. Well, whilst the nation has passed that psychological 100,000 people marker, the rate of infection is in general continuing to decrease. Apart from that dramatic increase on Tuesday, the downward trend overall continues. The infection rate actually today down by 16%. Now, all of this continues to be increasing pressure on Spain's already very overstretched health service. Dr. Rafael Bangla, a former regional health minister in the Basque Country government, gave the BBC his assessment of this situation.
The peak seems to be close to being reached. It is. We're now seeing some positive signals from other indicators. We know there's less people infected. There's a sort of deceleration of the number of people infected. The numbers of people going into UCIs, acute care units, is decreasing slowly. So I think we're beginning to see that we're going to be reaching that curve, and we're going to be able to see that these social isolation measures have worked, at least for Spain.
Let's hope so. Well, let's turn from Spain to Italy now, because these stringent lockdown measures there have been extended until the 13th of April. Although families can now, in fact, take their children outside for a walk if they need to. But the signs are emerging that the nation's stringent lockdown is, in fact, working. The Italian Civil Protection Agency has announced the death toll from COVID-19 had climbed by 727. This is, in fact, a smaller increase than that on Tuesday. Now, taking the total number of deaths to over 13,000. Italy has recorded more deaths than anywhere else in the world, but the infection rate, in fact, continues to rise. Around 4,700 more cases were reported just today, as opposed to yesterday's number of around 4,000. So with the very latest, our correspondent Mark Lowen reports from Rome.
A glimpse of freedom in Italy's new normal. Parents are now allowed to take their children out for a brief walk if urgent. After 3 weeks of lockdown, it's a breath of liberty, but no more. Welcomed, albeit with apprehension.
We're scared to be outside and a bit spaced out, because this lockdown has been our salvation. The measures are working. I'm happy they're in place, and we want them to go on.
This eases the tension. We're not used to staying inside the whole day. We need some natural light, and children need some space.
The infection rate is slowing, and there is perhaps a little bit more movement on the streets. But the fear is that if the restrictions are lifted too soon, people could get a false sense of security, and then the numbers could start jumping again. Because Italy is still far from defeating this virus. Deaths are still soaring, and among them, doctors.
Gynecologist Roberto Miletti died this week, one of 66 doctors lost to the outbreak here. His friend says the deaths were preventable if medics had proper masks and supplies.
We're very shocked. He was much loved. And we're very angry because we're lacking protection equipment for doctors. We feel vulnerable. Wars must be organized during peacetime, not battle. We've been sent in empty-handed in Italy and around Europe.
So young, inventive Italians have stepped in to help, using 3D printing to develop a valve that turns a sports shop snorkeling mask into a ventilator. The blueprint has been downloaded for free 1 million times by hospitals in need across the world.
2 days ago, it was my birthday, and I received a message from Brazil in which a doctor says me that 100 people were breathing thanks to my idea, and I was very, very happy. I cannot receive a better present for my birthday.
Italians are generally following the rules, but some frustration is starting to show. In the south, anger over a loss of money and closed shops. It's isolated, but patience has its limits. Today, the lockdown was extended to mid-April, so the emptiness goes on. Perhaps never again in our lifetime will we see Rome like this. The virus is sucking the life out of Italy. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Rome.
Now let's take a moment to have a look at the markets. It is the first day of a new quarter, and what goes up, well, must come down. After rallying last week, stocks from Asia to Europe to the US have all seen drops as the death toll globally creeps higher. Economic ramifications of the coronavirus becoming very clear. Just as we came on air, in fact, the closing bell of the Dow saw stocks sharply down 4.4%, coming after President Trump's warning that the US was heading into a painful 2 weeks. Investors are also preparing for tomorrow's unemployment figures, which are expected to be much higher than last week's number, showing 3.3 million has applied for unemployment benefits. Analysts believe that tomorrow's figures could be anywhere between 4 and 5 million. Well, all of this after both the Dow Jones and London's FTSE 100 have seen their biggest quarterly drop since 1987. Now, there are real fears that the global downturn could be far more punishing and long-lasting than initially feared, lasting into next year, potentially beyond that. Let's cross over to New York to speak to our correspondent Samira Hussein, who joins us live now. So the impacts of coronavirus just absolutely huge across across all spectrums.
Absolutely. Look, if you see the way that investors have been thinking about this just today, in the last few hours of trading, we saw this massive plunge down almost 1,000 points. And it's directly related to yet more news in terms of how much the virus has spread. So that we're hearing that in the United States, there are now more than 200,000 confirmed cases. So what this really tells investors is that these cases, the number of cases, continue to grow, and that means the economic impact of the virus is going to continue to be felt here. Remember, there's all these efforts in terms of trying to flatten the curve, to try and make it so it won't be so catastrophic, but it's becoming increasingly clear that it will, and that spillover effect onto the American economy, it is massive.
In the United States, there were more than 4,300 people who have died, and the number of confirmed cases has passed 200,000, more than any other country. New York State has seen the largest number of infections, and there have been almost 2,000 deaths there, 400 in just the past day alone. Governor Andrew Cuomo has warned that the peak is yet to come.
Nobody knows what's going to happen. And I understand the need for closure, the need for control. We're at a place we've never been before. We're out of control. I need to know. I need to know. Nobody can tell you.
Well, Wall Street stocks have fallen sharply off the back of weak jobs data, and there was a stark warning from the president. This is what he said yesterday.
I want every American to be prepared for the hard days that lie ahead. We're going to go through a very tough 2 weeks. And then hopefully, as the experts are predicting, as I think a lot of us are predicting after having studied it so hard, you're going to start seeing some real light at the end of the tunnel. But this is going to be a very painful, very, very painful 2 weeks.
And the figures are astounding. White House advisors have told us that between 100,000 and 240,000 Americans could in fact die from this virus.
As sobering a number as that is, we should be prepared for it. Is it going to be that much? I hope not. And I think the more we push on the mitigation, the less likelihood it would be that number. But as being realistic, we need to prepare ourselves that that is a possibility, that that's what we will see.
So this is an extremely sombering message, a very different message, in fact, from that the president was delivering just last week, when you'll probably recall he insisted that businesses could be back up and running by Easter. Our North America editor John Sopel has more on this from Washington.
Donald Trump said it was a matter of life and death when he briefed reporters last night, and there was something about his tone that was totally different. It was urgent, and he kind of sensed, you could sense just the somber nature of the message that he was having to deliver to the American people. Now, if that didn't frighten Americans, I think something that the Vice President Mike Pence has said today certainly will. He was asked where America is on its coronavirus journey, and he said the comparative that we ought to look at is Italy. Now, I think for the first time you've got the scientists, the doctors, the public health experts on the same page as the administration are marching in lockstep. One area where Washington feels entirely different to the rest of the country is that Donald Trump is saying, look, everything is fine with regards to testing. We've got PPE equipment out to all the people who need it. Listen to the front line where this war is being fought, and it is a totally desperate picture. There are problems with testing, there are problems of overcrowded hospitals, and there are problems of getting the testing done that is so badly needed.
There's also a problem on the US Navy. It says that it's begun evacuating thousands of sailors from an aircraft carrier after an outbreak on the ship, which is currently, in fact, docked in Guam. Now, a senior official says that the Navy is arranging hotel rooms on the Pacific island for many of the 4,000 plus crew, and also organising a skeleton team of uninfected sailors to keep this ship operational. Dozens on board the Theodore Roosevelt have tested positive. The ship's captain, Brett Crozier, wrote to the Pentagon earlier this week. He wrote calling that we are not at war. Sailors do not need to die. Decisive action is needed. Now, the Navy has admitted that there may have been a communications breakdown with the carrier and says that it's disappointed that this letter had been leaked. Now, we've also heard that a 30-day stay-at-home order is due to take effect in Florida tomorrow night. 21 million residents of the southern state will only be allowed outside to obtain or provide essential services or to conduct essential activities. Now, Florida has reported some 7,000 coronavirus cases and at least 85 deaths.